I think a good environment helps you to grow, and growth can happen when I can show up as the authentic me, even as my flawed me, meaning I might be a pain in the wrong side. However, that's me right now, and a good environment can help me actually grow, shape, become better in not being such a pain in the wrong side, I would say a good environment is also determined by where do I personally stand, meaning if I still want to grow and I'm the biggest fish in the pond, might not be the right environment. Although it's nice, it's comfortable, everything fine. But if I have outgrown that environment, maybe it's time to say bye to that one and find a new one where I can grow.
I'll make it as a coach, light the spark inside, empower every soul to turn the tide. I'll make it as a coach, help others grow, changing lives with every story I know.
Welcome to the Making of a Coach, where we unpack how coaches turned their passion into profession. My name is Tobi from metaFox, and on this episode I meet Ebony Fagbuyi. Ebony is based in Berlin and worked her way from being a customer support specialist in the early days of mobile phone subscriptions to coaching leaders of SMEs and corporations. Most of these leaders get to Ebony through coaching providers, platforms with pools of coaches that partner with businesses and enable leaders to book a coach. For Ebony, this takes away some of her hourly margin, but also a lot of exhausting marketing hustle. Let's hear it from the beginning and from Ebony herself. Who is your typical client and what challenge do they usually come with to you?
Yeah, that's a good question. Who is my typical client? If I would think of a group of people, those are executives, leaders. Some of them are in higher positions, let's say C-level board members, but they're also leaders in senior level and sometimes even aspiring leaders and those that are advancing in their career steps and wanting to lead different teams or come to the next step or want to find their way if leadership is something for them.
And who do they usually lead, or in which contexts do they lead?
That could be in any industry. So I am in automotive, electronics, consumer electronics, health, e-commerce, you just name it. Those are the clients that come to me.
And is that usually more from SMEs or large corporations, the typical size of the organization that the leader is employed at?
I would say the larger end of SMEs to enterprises. So I have large enterprises globally as well, which makes it for me personally quite interesting because it's always interesting to see how many people are actually working within a company and how are they leading, let's say, 1,000 people.
And how does a typical client journey look like then, from getting to know you or finding you in the first place to then also going into a journey?
Yeah. Well, the leaders usually find me through other avenues than the typical direct. I work with, I would say, coaching service providers a lot. You might know some of them. It's like Sharpist. These are more known in the German area, but in Americas, we have BetterUp, for instance. And what they do is they acquire basically the big companies that are looking for coaches within their organization to help their leaders develop. And then when they have these contracts, they have a pool of coaches that they say, we can match your staff or your leaders with those coaches. And a lot of them actually come through those avenues, which makes it nice for a coach because I don't have all the marketing acquisition and all of that. My part is getting onboarded with one of those or multiple of those, and then receiving the clients who are matched. However, my usual go-to was and is still by mouth to mouth.
Super interesting. So that means you work with platforms. Which are the most important ones?
I have multiple ones and I see also waves. And because we need to consider that I'm not the only coach there. So
Mhm.
there might be in one company, let's say 500 different coaches. So you can make the math. If they get 500 clients, not everyone will be matched one by one. One gets maybe 3 and other 2 get none at this round of matching. I'm also connected to one that does more mental health.
Mhm.
And then I see a lot of people coming through that one rather than through the typical business coaching area or avenues. So I can recommend to, for instance, listeners who say like, hey, I like this avenue. I have never experienced that or heard about it, to think of where to maybe onboard themselves and to also think of those who are in mental health, because coaches are needed and necessary in that as well. Although there would most likely be a differentiator internally of therapists, counselors, and coaches.
Yeah, for sure. And so which platforms should I check out if I'm an aspiring coach and I want to get clients through one of these platforms?
I could recommend Nilo, Nilo. You can check that one out. That is in mental health. They do a great job in how they interact with the coaches as well. They have a wonderful coach platform as well. And like they call them experts, where we can exchange as well. Or if I have a client that might need therapy right now and I want to refer, I can refer it amongst us to say like, hey, who is there? So I like all these kind of aspects. That is one that I can recommend. Then there is also Sharpist. Sharpist is one that I know of with regards to leadership business, although those are a lot of times also aspiring leaders, so starting their journey.
Mhm.
And then, of course, there are plenty others, but I don't know them directly. So I can just say, do a research on the companies that are there.
So then it's a client journey actually might not even start with the client, but with the HR person who works at a company and selected one platform. And then they maybe sort of pre-qualify a certain group of coaches. And then as a leader at that organization, I can pick from the 10 coaches that this organization is working with. Is that roughly how I can imagine it?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Those are mostly not 10, to be frank. That's usually like 3 to 4 coaches to check out. And then you have a discovery call or a clarity call or however you might call it. So they would come to me and then we have this conversation and we explore a little bit of what does the person want? What is coaching? What is it not? How can it help? And from that basis, they make the decision on which coach they go with. And then it goes back to the HR person. You can start making the appointments, etc., and reach out to one another.
So how does the HR person that is in the platform then pick you initially?
Let's take Sharpist, for instance. They are there. And then we have a company with HR and they do the negotiation of the larger contract and everything. And they're like, let's say we have 100 leaders here. Okay, they can be coached by our coaches. They do the program. What are the benefits? How can they scale? So that's where they discuss this. I am not in the picture. Then Sharpist then receives the 100 and they are matching the 100 of what they know from them. And they have conversations around that and giving information like, this is what we do. This is how we do it. And then they match the clients they receive automatically with 100 coaches or 50 or whatever. And the big work is done by Sharpist, basically. Does that make sense?
Yeah, now I understand it a bit better. Now you meet for the first time with that leader from the organization. What situation are they in? Can you give an example there?
Some of them are in finding themselves in difficult situations. That could be, for instance, they have started a new role and now they need to find their way in there. Maybe then the peers, they feel not accepted, integrated yet. They don't know how to lead because they are coming out of the peer perspective and now they become the leader or something of that sort. I have others that are exploring internal thought patterns and behaviors where they see like, I'm actually building up a wall here. I'm not getting anywhere, but I don't know why I feel this way.
Yeah, very interesting. I think the first time the two of us met, You also told me that you also work with leaders, C-level people from SMEs, and they often lack people they can talk to. And you are the person then where they can share what's going on. Would you say what you just described now also includes that, or is that sort of a different type of client that you also have?
That's the feedback I'm always getting, is that they're so happy that they have someone to talk to and that they appreciate the space I'm holding for them, the presence that I'm there, that they can just be free and talk about anything and everything. And they use this time to really have the moment to reflect, of course, but also someone who holds the space for them and has their back. Well,
What do you do to get into that role so they see you that way?
that's a very good question. What do I do? The first thing is I come prepared, meaning I can come mostly empty. I come prepared of my own hygiene, mental hygiene, and emotional hygiene. That is very important. So that is the first thing I do, to make sure that I can hold space, that I can be present, so that not 1,000 things are running in my mind, or I have biases that are still running and programs that are running.
Nice. Thank you. Yeah. With that, I would say let's move on to our next section, because I would be super curious, and this is also the point of our podcast, to learn how did you arrive to now today have these kinds of conversations with leaders from all over the world. And to get started in that conversation, I just sent you a link to our Icebreaker app. And now you land on a page with a prompt question that is, which picture describes you as a coach?
I go actually with this one.
Okay, awesome. What do you see here on that photo?
On the picture, what we see is a person that is walking up some stairs into the above. So it seems that this person is somewhere underneath the ground and is now coming up, like if you would think of a bunker, so to say, and you're going up the stairs. But you can see the light already that they're going up. So that's what it is. And the stairs, they have walls left, right. So there's no open space. It's just this staircase up.
Mm-hmm. How does that describe you as a coach?
It describes me as a coach with regards to the intention or the direction I see myself within the coaching area. So not so much about me personally, but with what I'm helping with. So when I see myself as a coach in this picture who is helping to find the way out, the way into the light, the way into the greater, the way into where they want to go, even if they don't see anything around them. So if they see walls, blockages, whatever that is. So that's what I resonated.
So the person in the picture is actually your client on their journey into the light.
I am the observer taking the picture, basically. That's me as a coach. What also comes with the observer perspective is that as a coach, I am not so much completely in the process. So I look on a plain canvas and painting that path. That, I guess, is the internal map that the lens one looks through that describes a coach. I feel like coaches in a classical way are there to hold the space, see the blank canvas that they can really move into and through certain things. I'm just helping to develop the picture of their life, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. You're there in the painting process while the client paints the picture of moving into the light.
All right.
Okay, nice. Good. So then with this picture that also describes your view on coaching nowadays, how did that view evolve? Thinking back of your origin and your coming. Can you take us a bit into that?
Yeah, well, the view and the understanding of coaching started when I experienced coaching myself in my first, I would say, proper adult work, where my parents would say, like, okay, this girl, our lady, she has a job. So I started working and I started in a call center. And call centers, you might know or not know, they also have internal trainers and coaches. So for communication, for sales, and all these processes. And when I was coached there, I felt quite empowered. I practice it myself because that's my learning model. I do things first and then I go to the theoretical part, like what have I actually done there? However, when I then did my training, my base training for coaching, I realized like, oh, there's much more to it. And it looks a little bit different, which means then it shaped into what kind of question am I asking? And I saw even greater results through that than what I have seen before. And I thought, my God, this is actually really great. And I also understood both ways of what it does with me and how I can apply it to a person that wants coaching.
I see some parallels to other stories I've heard. So, in the sense that when you started as a recipient of what you believed coaching back then was more of a coach consulting, maybe training, like also getting expert advice, so to say. And as your journey as a coach evolved, it became more of what maybe today you would say coaching actually is less, no, not the expert at all, but more the person who's there while the client paints their picture, sort of. Your interest in coaching started in parallel with a interest in leadership. Can you elaborate a bit on that? What role did leadership play for you?
A very significant role because in the environment I was in, there were many leaders. And of course, you make friends there as well. And there were situations where I thought this is not fair or this is really hurtful. And they repeated themselves there. So I was asking myself how it comes that some people are placed in a leadership position when they have such an influence over and into people. And I could see this influence. I couldn't name it at that time, but I could see dynamics that are happening. And it seemed to a lot of times start or at least circle around the leader. And so I became very curious about it. And from there, I started a long distance study in management.
Mm-hmm. And how did that translate into your daily work? How did the leadership education influence it?
It helped me to check myself as I was going out on the route of becoming a trainer and a coach. Not really knowing that actually that was leadership already. However, I took that into consideration because I've seen it firsthand and learning a little bit more about how businesses work and so on and so forth. I looked through a new lens when I was now in different companies working there myself. And in that, I needed to showcase some sort of leadership. Looking back, I guess going first, right? I mean, modeling what you are teaching. There is the saying, practice what you preach, right? So I did the things, and that's how it became a companion, I would say, throughout my development. Leadership was always there. So coming out of the role as a trainer and coach and stepping into the official role of a leader of a team or a department, a leader has a great influence on environments, people's minds, what they think about X, Y, Z.
And what makes a good environment?
Sure, we need to define what is good, right? When for me, that would be, it's a healthy environment where where I feel I can be me. And even if I get corrected in something because it doesn't fit into the overall culture agreement that I have agreed to, cultures have certain main agreements that they stand on. not in terms of rules or laws or something, but a certain agreement, what is happening here and why we're coming together, so to say. So when I'm part of that and in that environment, then I think a good environment helps you to grow. And growth can happen when I can show up as the authentic me, even as my flawed me, meaning I might be a pain in the wrong side. However, that's me right now, and a good environment can help me actually grow, shape, become better in not being such a pain in the wrong side, you know? So I believe that's a good environment. So it helps me in that way. And then I would say a good environment is also determined by where do I personally stand, meaning if I still want to grow and I am already, John Maxwell says, I'm the biggest fish in the pond. Yeah, might not be the right environment. So it might not be good in terms of being in that environment. Although it's nice, it's comfortable, everything fine. But if I have outgrown that environment, maybe it's time to say bye to that one and find a new one where I can grow, learn, and become.
Hmm. So a good environment is a one where you can be yourself, where you can grow. And then at some point where you notice, okay, I actually need to change my environment now to grow further. How did it evolve once you had arrived in Berlin?
I saw in the newspaper a job ad for a senior manager at Sony for complaint management. Mind you, I've never been a leader, nonetheless, or not even a senior leader. But I'm like, oh, what they're right over there. I've been in customer care. I love complaint management. I had so much experience that I thought, like, of course I can do this. This is a job for me. And with all of that internal encouragement, I just applied. They invited me, and I actually got to the last round where I had to give a case study kind of thing where this is a scenario. What would you do? And they had all these words of senior management where I'm like, I never heard about this. What is this analysis? What is that? And I just gave it my best shot. And they came back and said to me, unfortunately, we can't give you the senior management role. However, we see a lot of potential in you and where you are right now. And we have created for you a leadership role underneath the senior manager if you want it. And of course I said yes, but I gave it the shot. So that's my story here with different environments.
Super nice. And that's how you arrived in a leadership position eventually after having had the training and coaching exposure already in the call center Jamba business, and then going through the leadership assessment and your leadership studies at the same time, right? And then finally being in a leadership position. What were your key takeaways from that time?
Well, the first thing that happened was like imposter syndrome on steroids. That's what happened. I was like, oh my goodness, I'm all over myself, over my head. What happened was my boss and I, we were both new. As you remember, we were at the same assessment and job application. However, we did not have the best connection to where can we get the information that we need to really find our ways. So no full clarity and vision from him. How can I then have that? Because my boss does not have that. So I needed mine, and I had a team that also needed one. So you can see how that already looks like, right? And simultaneously to that, I felt I had to catch up with knowing all the devices. They have so many different electronics and little letters and numbers next to it and what they can and what they can't do. And there was so much at once that it was quite overwhelming. So that's where I started. I needed to sift through. I had to think into how do I actually apply leadership. I wasn't aware of it at the beginning because my focus was so much on how can I swim now? I have to learn a ton. Thing is changing. Most likely Sony doesn't even know how things look like. It was hard. It was really hard. Plus I had now a team that also started at the same time. And like the pressure was there. And that's where, finding myself in this, I would say, happened. Once that was settled, we had more structure and who's doing actually what, how are we doing it, etc. It got much better. For me, I'm a servant leader, so I like to look from the perspective of how can I add value to the team. And in that, I also had conversations with people outside of the company when I felt I needed a mentor or someone to talk to. And they at the time had maybe different postures on certain things.
You were still figuring out the subject matter at that time. You didn't have a clear vision coming from your leader, and yet you had to be there for your team. How were you there for your team at that time?
Well, I was there the best way I knew, which was hands-on. To be honest, there was not much leadership in that sense. My first thing was like, okay, how can I be a leader? Well, I need to show that I'm on it, I'm learning, I'm doing the same job as they do, basically, with regards to their jurisdiction. And that's the first thing I tapped into, which was on one side, I believe, looking retrospectively, good to see that I'm not too whatever to not get my hands dirty. However, it also shaped the expectation that I would do that forever, because later on I had difficulties getting out of that self-made role of I'm just as you, peer here, not meaning in terms of how I look at you, but what are our roles and my job, basically. So then I had my difficulty to like, okay, how do I get this now entangled? Um,
And how did you entangle that?
Personally, how I entangled it, we were defining like, okay, when do you escalate so and so? And I would start to like give those escalations back if they belong to them. They can come to me if they really have a question that no one can answer, they don't find or don't know where to go or whatever. Yes. But starting that was crucial to empower them to do their job and to grow in there, but also for me to keep the time free of what is my actual role there. At that time, that I would say that was more like training and managing certain things until I could actually really lead. So what I was doing, not knowing at that time, is carving through management to get me to leadership, if that makes sense.
Increasing your level of delegation in a way, giving more responsibility and increasing the severity of problems that people come to you with.
Right. We had some big challenges and bigger challenges to kind of maneuver through with regards to leadership and how I brought them to the table and they shaped me or shaped my leadership.
We'll get in a minute to how then eventually you became a freelance coach, but let's quickly fast forward. I'm wondering, how does that experience shape how you coach leaders today?
Well, these experiences have shaped me exactly in the last thing, what I just mentioned, and how I carry myself. Coaching, as we had with this picture, and as I understood more and more, is less of exactly that. That is a huge differentiator with regards to how I coach today than I coached before. Before there was much more pressure of myself for myself, but also pressure that then extended to my coachee because they wanted to get somewhere. I wanted to help them get there and they're not getting there fast enough, so to say, or don't you see it? Whatever might be going on within me at that time, or instead of in a reflective question, being more directive because of that. But these are little nuances, and all of this has shaped me on how I lead them and what they then sense, and likewise also multiply. And if we break out a little bit of the classical coaching, I have also students of mentoring and maybe coaching that is, yes, with the directive part. I share my stories there as well, which they value a lot. So that helps them. And how I coach is, again, by going first basically. So I'm modeling that. That is how I lead them. I model to them how maybe a good, very simple example, but how feedback could look like, for instance, different than what they thought it could be. Modeling it through, have you thought about X, Y, Z? What do you understand that the other person might have gone through or imagined or felt like, etc. Whether like, I've never thought about that, So this is how I lead them, where I can see also there's multiplication happening. Some people even said like, well, Ebony, now I'm doing what you did. Now I understand what that was all about. And this is a silent multiplication, I would say, of personally a good, favorable skill sets or qualities that I could leave with others because I have been through and understand where they're coming from and what could be a challenge to them.
And if we get a bit more practical, let's say I'm now a leader and a client of yours, and you see that my area of development, my obstacle is the pressure I apply to myself, the pressure that I therefore also transmit to my team members. How would you help me out of that? Or is that question in itself already kind of the trap? Because then I'm again, like getting away from that coaching mindset of nowhere to go to how can we get into this direction?
As coaching is more of the reflective part. So I'm not telling you like, I'm not telling you or showing you how do you get out of there. I would say, yes, I'm good at seeing patterns as you talk. I might see certain things, etc. But as a coach, it's not my job to say like, this is what you now need to do. So in the coaching conversation, I would ask these questions, probing questions, reflective questions about certain things that come to realization to the coachee that has this problem. When I start to see like, okay, this loop is happening even as the person is talking about the loop. So in real time, I would then intersect here and would say like, okay, what do you understand when I tell you like, beginning you started here and now you're here as you talk about this repeating itself? What comes to your mind right now? Like I would bring it back as a reflection. Do you see the pattern yourself that is just happening? And what do you need right now? Maybe that helps you to step out of it. What are the learnings that you have gathered throughout this entire process that has actually helped you to have less pressure or alleviate the burden that is there? Where would you like this burden to be? Like we would find ways of what do you want to do with this cycle or with this burden, etc. When they come back into the loop thinking, to help them get out of the loop thinking by either, bringing it back to like, that's the mirror. And then they start reflecting on the next one. My job is to help them stay in the positive loop of getting either out through new revelation about that, or at least leaving it there for later. Like what just happened? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So it is this mirroring, showing them the pattern that's there. And that is something different from feedback, maybe, where you would say, okay, I hear you behave like that, and this has this impact on me or something. That's what a mentor would do, not a coach. And instead, you simply sort of record, reflect back, and then leave it to them what they do with that.
Right. Yes. Always in the best intent of our agreement in the partnership. So if they tell me this is where I want to go, I might challenge them. Not in terms of like whatever they want to do with it. It's like, no, not everything flies with Ebony and you're coaching here right now because you gave me permission to get you there and maybe to interrupt you, to be frank. Some are like, Ebony, if you see something, please tell me. I'm like, well, what I'm seeing right now, correct me if I'm wrong, is the following. And then I summarize and I just give back what I just observed. And they're like, thank you for that. That's exactly. I'm like, oh my goodness. But that's enough usually for them to take next steps.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Thank you. Okay, I would like to explore a bit how you became a coach. And what struck me earlier is that your journey at Sony is very much shaped by this hands-on learning, right? You learned the craft of leadership by actually being a leader. Then you got involved in partnership development. You learned how to network within the Sony corporation. And I guess all of these things you also took with you then in your freelance career. So now I'm wondering, what were the formal learning steps that you took to then eventually become a freelance coach?
That was a long distance study. It went almost 3 years with intense learning, writing materials, etc., but also supervision and practice. So that's the next thing I did. I left Sony after my last position with this wonderful man that was my last boss. And when I left, I had to decide what to do now. And I took this opportunity actually to say, like, you know what, you always wanted to try to have your own business and to freelance or however you call it. So that's what I did. So where I went is to the job center. I went there and I discussed it and I told her, like, this is what I actually want to do. Can you help me there? And they said that, yeah, we can, instead of you getting unemployment money, you getting the money to set up your own freelance business. So I said, well, I want to go this route then. And that's what we did. So we applied the investment of that fund into that. And that was my formal step. And then obviously I had to go to the authorities for registering the company. And when you are a freelancer, it's a lot easier with regards to you just use a name and give the company a name. It doesn't take long.
Are you a freelance solopreneur or do you actually have a legal entity also?
I'm still a freelance solopreneur. I have a legal entity in the UK, but I intend to use it differently. So not quite sure if I move everything there at one point. But right now, I still want to keep it running this way.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. And in terms of formal learning, I know that you trained as a systemic coach, you trained in NLP, behavioral profiling, DISC, design thinking. How was that journey? Did that happen in parallel to your employments?
While I was with Sony, I already started looking into John Maxwell, which is the leadership certification. And of course, the network we met through as well here in Berlin. So I thought, like, okay, let me have a look. So that was the second one. And then I started working as a coach and of course had to find my way. I thought I start with low hanging fruits. And as you just mentioned, I knew how to network and I like to speak to people, etc. And so I went to a business breakfast around my corner. And as I went there, the people sitting there, they introduced themselves, but I had a feeling of, it's more about eating than really doing something, you know? So it was my turn then. And I was like, this is who I am. This is what I do. Blah, blah, blah. And then one gentleman at the end got up and said, like, Ebony, I would like to meet you. And I'm like, who are you? It's like, well, I'm running a business. And what we do is we have coaches in our company and we basically give them clients through either from the job center. They have a lot of coaching clients there or private companies that need coaching, etc. And then from there, the same day, even he spoke to me and he's like, you should meet so-and-so. She is there and there. And I'm like, I'm going to go home, get my papers and be there in half an hour. Okay. Went home, got my stuff, went to her, signed the deal. And the rest is history with that one. It's different to say, I'm Ebony Fagbuyi, I do X, Y, Z. Then I'm Sony, I'm leading X, Y, Z, right? There's Sony behind your back. So that was different. And that's my first step into it and the certifications I did to it. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, you mentioned the Maxwell Leadership Foundation. What role do networks of that kind play for you back then and today?
Yeah. Well, back then it was different reasons. One, that I was connected to a community. Going out there alone feels alone. And with the John Maxwell team, it felt like I'm not alone. I had people who think alike, who are passionate about the same. Plus, it was a certification. Although I'd have to be frank, from a German standpoint, looking in, I would say it was a nice add-on training workshop with a certificate. I would not consider it a full certification to become a trainer, coach, or speaker by going there live. It's an online program. You really have to immerse yourself to do and go through this online program to become that by having 3 days of something. I like to network in general, but I don't subscribe straight to a network because of commitment. I'm a person, if I do that, then I'm fully committed. I'm not just doing it like, okay, I'm here once and then bye-bye. However, networks, I believe, are good for all these reasons. And also for display, of course, especially if you start, you have platforms, and if you go in there and be friendly to people, get to know them, they get to know you, then you land on a metaFox platform, right? In the podcast. Hello, everyone. So that's why I believe it's a good thing to do that and to see wider than your own atmosphere or whatever.
So trying to summarize a bit, maybe you say, okay, you got this community, you were not alone. You got the exposure also in the example of John Maxwell Foundation, at least, to other markets, to the US, to the UK, getting out of your bubble, also getting the first exposure to, okay, you do the leadership coaching certification there. To what extent do you also acquire clients from there?
I do not really acquire clients from there. I do now, through the ICF accreditation, have the possibility and the access to mentor those who would like to be accredited. If you, Tobi, would say like, hey, I'm going on a coaching journey, I have finished my coaching and now I want to pass the ICF credentialing, then I could come at your side as your mentor, because mentorship is required in order to apply for an ICF badge in any level, ACC, PCC, or MCC. So from that, I could acquire customers or clients that say, that's what I need, and I want Ebony as my mentor to help me go through the process. Clients in the sense of coaching clients, I don't do that. I don't have that. What comes in terms of partnerships is the lady I mentioned with regards to coaching service providers. A colleague of mine got me into a gig, so to say. She is also a John Maxwell member. So we are friends, we meet, we coach each other with regards to accountability. But that is like, it happens through building friendships and coming up with ideas to say like, hey, I could need some help as an accountability partner.
Yeah. So first you make friends, you meet peers, and then one thing leads to the other, which eventually might also include new clients, new business, but that is rather 2-3 steps down the road, not a direct client acquisition channel. What would you say are your most relevant client acquisition channels today then?
I'm having those service providers, word of mouth, and networks where they see me speak, etc. So there are different approaches, and I'm finding, as you can see, myself there as well on how could that best work. But to find people that they can trust you and book you, this could be an approach that they get to know me and are able and willing to invest. Because to be frank, my coaching hour, if I just go by hour, that is not 20 or 50 euros per hour. It's quite some invest. So, yeah.
But how much is it?
Right now, I'm offering it for 400 euros an hour.
Mm-hmm. And that's usually paid by the employer of your client or also by the client themselves?
Yes, it's by the employer, the client themselves, if, of course, they can afford it so far, or if we can make a package or so. However, I would say it would not be in a range of 100 euro or 150 euros per hour.
Mhm. Can you get to these numbers also working with these service providers?
Unfortunately not, no. But my guess is that they take, of course, a lion's share of the coaching hour, to be honest, because they do also have to pay for their whole company, the pre-work that they're doing, the marketing and all these things. However, the payment is still, I would say, good on the front end, on an end of a mid-range, I would say. But everyone is free, obviously, to choose where they want to go. So I had others where they said like you will earn 60, 65 US dollars per hour, where I'm like, no, sorry. And then there are others, they say like we pay you 120 euros or dollars. So one has to, I guess, to decide where they are right now, where they feel comfortable with. You know, if you earn 65 euros, congratulations, right? When I started, I made 18 euros per hour. So I'm not saying this from a standpoint of make 400, 500, 600. I'm embarking on my master level, mostly to be acknowledged. It took a long time, and many, many hours and 2 decades to get there. So that's where I'm talking from. So I just want to make that clear.
Yeah. And that means when you work with the service provider, you cannot get those 400 euros that the client might even pay per hour. They don't arrive at you, but maybe you end up with half of that. Something
that would be the higher end of service providers who give you that payment.
But then at the same time, you don't have to take care of all that marketing machine and that efforts that we previously discussed.
Right.
Yeah. How did you pick those service providers that you work with nowadays?
I came to it as well, again, in a very interesting way. I gave a training at that time for young students within a company. And one of them, after I have helped them, went to that first service provider. And they just started out through startup. They told her, find coaches. She knew one coach in her life. She reached out and said, Ebony, are you interested? And I said, I am. And that's how they found me and I found them.
Let's say I'm a new coach and I want to take a bit more of a structured approach to that, to finding a service provider, a partner I can work with. What would you say should I look out for?
I would look out for, depending on your credentials, or companies, coaching provider companies that accommodate your structure. So what I'm saying is Coach Hub, for instance, is one of those. They only take people with ICF accreditation or similar. So you need that credential. If you don't have it, then have that as a distinction of where you should look and go for. I would search anything around, as I said, coaching provider, mental health, coaching business, coaching pools for coaches. You can also go on LinkedIn. There are a lot of those companies. They are like, we're looking for coaches.
Thanks. And you said you've been coaching since 20 years. Only 2 years ago, you started your ICF accreditation process.
Yes.
What made you do that?
My final arrived humbleness. Well, it is that I saw through this process of wanting to onboard with more, because you never know how my own business is going with regards to acquiring clients in a natural, organic way without the marketing. And while doing that, I came across all these great, amazing companies, but they all wanted accreditations. Are you accredited here? Do you have that? And I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't have that. So I finally then said, I will do it. And once I have it, then thank you, it's done. So it was out of the necessity, I would say, to do it.
Yeah. So to paraphrase, you found those coaching providers as your sweet spot acquisition channel in a way. And in order to be onboarded with more of them, you needed that label of quality, ICF, MCC, etc. How was the process of going through that certification?
What you do is you have to gather your base training material. So there are different paths that they have. I am a non-ICF trained one. You can go through a coaching training that already is ICF approved, meaning if you find a coaching school and they have the ICF label there, it means it already is a curriculum of the ICF. But mine wasn't. So what I had to do is I had to send in all my training material to showcase what I have learned. You do that online. You build basically your own membership profile. There you have different things that you need to upload, which of this is one of them. Then you have to let them know how many hours were synchronous, asynchronous, because they also have certain regulations on that. You also fill in your hours that you have done coaching. For MCC now, it's 2,500 hours, I believe you need to have. So you need to have them recorded on, Excel or whatever. And then you need to have 3 months of mentorship with a mentor on your level that you are applying or higher. And this mentorship needs to have 10 hours, I believe, 10 hours of mentoring. And from that mentoring best, you create 2 recordings of your coachings that you think are showcasing the level that you're applying for. They should have a certain length, etc. So there are also requirements here. You have a transcript to it, you upload it. And once you have fulfilled all of these things, then they will check everything. And once they say everything is green light, then you have to do a test at the end, which goes 3 hours or 3.5 hours. And you can do that on site in a building where they have an observer there, or you can do it at home, which I did remotely, which is, next level observation, I would say. And but I did it, I made it, and I was happy to get approved.
Nice. Is there anything that you think we should have still talked about when it comes to your journey as a coach and the business building as a coach?
It's a very good question. I would just summarize to the journey and the business building of a coach. What I think is wonderful and necessary is, for my opinion, own life experience. I would like to maybe highlight that again. I know we once talked about, do you need to have leadership skills to be able to coach leaders, etc. And back then I would have said, no, not at all. You can coach anyone, as long as you can coach, which is still my belief. However, I believe once you have gone through a certain experience in any kind of thing, right? You have a different view, perspective, empathy, all of these things, just due to that, was the way you can relate. So I would say if someone is wanting to embark on leadership coaching, find opportunities to lead, because that will help you become a better coach for leaders.
And that may not even be because you need to have that hard skill, but because in order to get to the attitude that you described of coaching is actually doing less, you need to go through that journey of personal development.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I know that some also ask that meaning some of these coaching service providers, they ask you on how many years of leadership, what kind of position of leadership. They will ask you if you want to be an executive coach. They will ask you, have you been an executive yourself? From my personal perspective, the more important part is you have this empathy, understanding, as you just summarized it nicely. not so much the title of that. So, but still, to go through the hoop and you want to go there, make sure that you take that in consideration as you becoming that coach on this way, that you actively seek out maybe roles where you can be yourself a leader and an executive in a role.
This was my conversation with Ebony Fagbuyi. And I think what impressed me personally the most was the point Ebony reiterated in the very beginning and the end of our interview. How today she practices her emotional hygiene, the preparation of emptying herself to be ready for a client. And how she got to that point through this maturing process that enabled her to do less as a coach, taking away all the expert attitude and simply holding a space. And if you say, Tobi, that's all nice, but I found Ebony's client acquisition through coaching providers much more relevant and interesting for me, then I have two things. On the one hand, we link the companies Ebony works with, Nilo, Sharpist, BetterUp, in our show notes. On the other, I also would like to recommend our very first episode with Marcel Hebold, who as an HR consultant and coach takes a similar but also slightly different approach, working as a subcontractor of consulting agencies. Either way, if you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend, follow us on Spotify, YouTube, Apple, or wherever you listen to podcasts. That really helps us a ton. This was The Making of a Coach. I am Tobi from metaFox. All the best and until next week.